Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about one of my original inspirations for all of this, Sam Fisher. I'll be giving you my take on how you can fight and take on some of the traits that he has as an average person. We'll go over a bit of his history, how that plays into his fighting style, and other stuff like lore. Let's start with where Fisher comes from and what his base is. A big part of Sam's character is that when you first meet him, he's already that old, grizzled veteran, the best of the best type of guy. So the first place we're going to look is his time in the US Navy for his base. He was always the type of man to go above and beyond, surviving extreme conditions and standing out amongst his peers. His time in the SEALs is the first sort of look we have into his physical capabilities and how he fights. Normal people probably can't do what SEALs do, and especially not a fictional one like Fisher, but what we can do is try out their fitness test. They have one available. I think it's more of a qualifier thing, but it's more than enough to get you pretty fit for daily life. Plus, if you haven't learned to swim, honestly, what are you doing? It's a form of movement that every single human should know, at least to some degree. It's like walking and running. This is more so about preparedness to a degree, like you never know when you might have to swim to either save yourself or help someone else who can't swim. They're unlikely scenarios, sure, but not impossible. Civilization is a layer on top of base human life, and that layer is capable of melting. A major part of Sam's skills comes from how he handles guns. So, for you, just go to a range, practice, hit a target accurately. If you live in a place that doesn't let you carry, you can skip over this part, and I'm not going to go too far into the firearm stuff, but if you can carry, learn to draw and fire fast and accurately. Now that we're getting into hand-to-hand combat, I'm sure the SEALs, and by extension the Navy, has their own form, but it's not a unified martial art. Let's look at McMap, for example. What they do is they take a bunch of moves and drill them over and over. They're not going to be as in-depth as something like full-on mixed martial arts, because the soldier's main fighting style is shooting. I'm assuming hand-to-hand fighting for the military is more like a break glass in case of emergency scenario. The next major event in Sam Fisher's history is when he was recruited by the NSA to join their Splinter Cell program. Now, to be selected for the Splinter Cell program in the first place, you'd have to be exceptional, unusual, a guy who had skills to surpass the best Special Forces operators. Although Fisher had firearms training and some martial arts knowledge from his time as a SEAL, as a Splinter Cell, his hand-to-hand combat and stealth skills were taken to the next level. Fun fact about this, Tom Clancy himself, the guy who came up with this Splinter Cell thing, he was looked into by the government in around the 80s because his book, The Hunt for Red October, had a bunch of pretty accurate details on what was supposed to be classified information. Clancy himself was just a civilian. He wasn't even like ex-military or anything. He was just really good at researching and writing stuff for this genre. He even extrapolated the design of a Soviet submarine just from publicly available sources and his own guesswork. So even if Sam's goggles are still fantasy, the idea of a Splinter Cell is probably going to be more realistic than you think. Splinter Cell agents are basically spies who, in some cases, are granted a fifth freedom. The fifth freedom is fictional, by the way. Don't freak out. It basically lets agents do things like assassinating officials, spying on other friendly government agencies, ignoring agreements, kidnapping and torturing, and other stuff like that. Basically reprehensible things. The real four freedoms outlined by Roosevelt are freedom of religion, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. As long as they are protecting those four freedoms, Splinter Cell agents can use that fifth, a freedom to do whatever it takes. Once you are granted the fifth freedom, the end justifies the means. This also means that if one of these guys is captured or killed, the government can disavow them. I'm definitely sure something like a Splinter Cell already exists, or has existed for a while. Given how close Clancy's work was to reality, this idea, agents who aren't real to the public and are allowed to ignore laws, is not too far off. So as a Splinter Cell, Sam's training was taken to the next level. Parkour was probably part of it, as they would have to clamber and put themselves into odd positions to stay undetected. The split jump is probably the most famous example of this. Another huge part of staying undetected is dragging and hiding bodies. So if you want to mimic this, you could do weighted carries or farmer's walks or something similar, dragging or carrying something around. a sandbag may actually be a good approach for this sort of thing. Sam also hangs from ledges and other places for the longest time. Yeah, I know it's probably more to do with gameplay, but if you want to hang from a place for a really long time, work on dead hangs, chin-ups, and pull-ups. These are not programs, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. If you are new to working out in general and you're watching this, you must understand that the exercise portions of these videos are just suggestions to tack on to whatever existing plans you may have. Don't go into a gym and do nothing but these exercises. You're going to screw yourself up. With the lore, the cool stuff, and the physical conditioning out of the way, now let's get into the fun stuff. I'm sure you assumed this already, but I'm taking tons of this from Splinter Cell Conviction and Splinter Cell Blacklist because the animations are the cleanest there. I've heard people say that his main fighting style is Krav Maga, but I'm going to go on a tangent about this. I have to warn you against taking it up in real life. If you plan to take up Krav Maga, even though it might be accurate to Sam's style, you should be very careful about which gym you go to. I'm talking about Krav in terms of what I know about it. If I'm wrong about this, and you've done this and believe it works, or, have used it, let me know. I am genuinely curious about Krav Maga, or this general self-defense kind of thing that's not really a combat sport. Krav's goal is to teach people quick and effective self-defense moves, right? But from what I know, it's just not very reliable. Usually it comes with these really weird knife defense techniques and very flimsy stuff. Another major flaw of this is that even if these moves work, which they might, they're trained in an unrealistic environment or an unrealistic way. Thinking that something like a groin kick, for example, is just some instant win button is a bad idea. I'll go over Sam's specific moves in a bit, but I have to set this up right here. If I had to give Krav some praise, which I'm reluctant to do, I would say its main purpose is to instill an aggressive mindset, not to teach a moveset. This already destroys its effectiveness as a fighting style. Think about it, right? Your best case scenario when taking up Krav Maga or something similar is coming in knowing something that already works. As far as I know, what you learn in Krav Maga or at similar self-defense gyms really depends on who's teaching you. For example, let's say the Krav Maga coach has kickboxing experience, you're learning stripped-down kickboxing. Coming in with BJJ, you're getting some version of that, maybe with some other stuff tacked on. Best case scenario for Krav Maga would be some bare minimum form of MMA, which gives you a little bit of everything, a little bit of all the basics, but you drill them non-stop to the point where you're good at them. If Krav was minimalist MMA, I personally would be doing that from the very beginning. I also hope that you self-defense Krav Maga types know that I'm dunking on a very specific subset of people. You know which one, the no rules on the street or that wouldn't work on me kind of guys. I'm sure there are less of them, especially after mixed martial arts and the UFC became popular, and I'm certainly glad that they're not on my channel, but they're always going to be around. By the way, there is something else that fits this minimalist vibe that Sam has, which you may want to look into. It's the fighting methods that W.E. Fairbairn taught. His stuff is much more in line with this minimalist military combatives vibe that you may want for maxing out your LARP. And even if these moves are outdated by today's standards, you can still read Fairbairn's manuals. He wrote this stuff down. Fairbairn by himself is an interesting figure, and he is the kind of exceptional man that would have qualified to become a Splinter Cell. Quick summary for you guys. This guy, Fairbairn, he spent time fighting gangs as part of the Shanghai police, founded and led their riot squads, developed fighting methods based on his experiences there and combining kung fu and judo and other stuff, and then he basically created the modern SWAT team. And these are only some of the stuff he's done, which I've greatly simplified. Jack Dempsey also wrote a military fighting manual called How to Fight Tough, which you can check out. The problem with these books is that you need to train these movements, but there are no gyms teaching these exact systems. I still think they can serve as very interesting supplements for whatever you're actually doing, and as interesting pieces of history by themselves. Now, regardless of how impressive the men who wrote these books actually are, the books by themselves will not be enough. You can't just pick one up and learn how to fight. Going to a gym and practicing in a 3D space with 3D people is really the best way to learn. This is a physical endeavor, it's a sport, So even though you can use videos and books as something like homework, which I've done, you should not use this stuff as original sources. They are not the be-all, end-all. I hope that last part made sense. I would also like to mention that styles like Aikido that most definitely are not for straight-up fighting have their own uses. If we're talking about self-defense, wrist locks are probably more useful to people like bouncers who would need to subdue targets or move people around. Self-defense doesn't always mean some unspoken duel or fight for your life. It's a whole thing with different levels to it. Sometimes you just have to get someone to quit bothering you or turn them away, and that involves more verbal de-escalation than anything else. Everything in this space has a context, like ukemi or breakfalls are probably going to be much more useful for protecting yourself in daily life than roundhouse kicks. Everything has its uses as long as you know what you're learning and why you're learning it. My point with this rant was that you may want to take up these supposed military styles because they're designed for killing people, but in reality they're going to instill an extremely dangerous sense of false confidence, especially if you don't spar, you know? If you're going to have a simple moveset like Sam does, you want to make sure every single move is done correctly and has been tested in sparring. You know it's going to work. That's what you want. You fall back to the level of your training when you're stressed out. So what your muscle memory has been molded into is extremely important, which is why you should try your best to explore martial arts. I'd encourage everyone to spend a bit of time in this field, because even if you never do any of it ever again, something you learned, something you might not expect to help, might actually save you in the future. Krav Maga, the Fairbairn system, these World War II manuals are all closer to Sam Fisher's vibe, but for you as a real person, I wouldn't trust it. If you've taken Krav Maga classes or Detroit urban survival training stuff and actually genuinely benefited from them, I would like to hear about this in the comments. Because if this stuff works, then I would list it as a style that you can take to copy Sam Fisher, and that it would actually work for you. Because if not, we're just going to go with my take on this. The actual melee takedowns are not very complex. They consist of things like elbows, knees, sometimes roundhouses, and he also slams his gun into opponents' heads. Now you can't practice that last one at a gym, so let's narrow it down. Elbows, knees, roundhouse kicks, all trademarks of Muay Thai. It's a proven style, a tough style, and the most important part is that you have a very high chance of coming across a legit gym instead of a McDojo. And that last point is my beef with Krav Maga, the ratio of good gyms to bad. Muay Thai is pretty much like a 99% chance of having a good gym. You'll learn proper, useful fighting methods, go through physical conditioning, make yourself tougher, more confident, all that. Plus, you'll notice a lot of Sam's attacks are from very close range. Alongside elbows and knees, the clinch is one of Muay Thai's defining aspects. It may not be attached striking in the same sense as Kudo, where you grab clothes, and it may not be grip fighting, but you're still going to be able to pull enemies into your strikes, and you're still going to be able to manage yourself in extremely close range, which more often than not is actually going to turn up in self-defense scenarios. You're not going to start off touching gloves. Let's look at Blacklist for some more interesting moves. The barehanded style they gave Sam there, I think, was Sistema, but just like Krav Maga, I'm suspicious about it. A lot of his non-lethal takedowns there involve grappling, bringing people to the ground, so the closest reliable style you could do would be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You'll definitely learn to take people down and control them there. Whatever disadvantages BJJ has on les streets, that's a different conversation. You want to be Sam Fisher. Sam brings people down and renders them unconscious in Blacklist, and that's one of BJJ's main things. For any of its faults, right? You don't have to learn Imanari rolls or something crazy to be Sam Fisher. He's like 50. You can get good at the basics. Simplicity is key here. Also, please learn breakfalls. They've helped me. Hopefully your gym teaches you how to roll forwards, backwards, all ukemi stuff. Considering how Sam's knees are not dust even in his old age, breakfalls will help you forever. They may come in handy when you least expect it, like tripping on a sidewalk. Of course, the highlight of Blacklist combat, I saved this one for last, is the knife, the karambit. The movements he uses for it probably came from some kind of Filipino martial arts system. Let's just go with Kali. I think everyone either calls it Kali or Arnis or something like that. All of these FMA knife styles teach you to fight with sticks and bladed weapons, and sometimes the sticks act as substitutes for blades. It's very complicated. I've never done FMA, so I can't speak to its effectiveness. Nor do I want to speak to its effectiveness, but you can give it a shot if you have a gym near you, or if you just want to go all the way with the LARP. So as a final recap, my formula to fight like Sam Fisher as an average ordinary guy is the following. Learn to handle firearms responsibly if you can. Learn more forms of movement like swimming and basic parkour. Develop muscular endurance through things like dead hangs, sled pulls, sled pushes, dragging, carrying things around. Then, once you've acquired these aspects, at least to some degree, take up Muay Thai as your main bare-handed standing style. If you want, you can substitute or supplement Muay Thai with Kali or BJJ. Also, for fun, try reading some interesting military fighting manuals for maximum vibes. Alright, so that's it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think. Definitely let me know if Krav Maga works or if I was right about it. Both legit and McDojo stories would be funny and interesting to read in the comments. If you made it all the way to the end, comment about how Ubisoft is pretty much cooked. Otherwise, drop some stories, and let me know what you think of my analysis or cobbled together guide, and if you have alternative suggestions for this, I'd like to hear them. So yeah, a poll will be up with more characters later, and would love to hear what you guys want to see me talk about next. Thank you all so much for watching, and see you all next time.